Hi everyone, and welcome to the next of our Thrive webinars where we're digging into the process of choosing a learning vendor. And it's a bit of a minefield out there at the moment as the learning technology market is booming. So we thought, what better way than to bring a couple of our customers together to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities facing them as a business and some of the reasons that they chose to go with Thrive. So I'm really excited to dig into the conversation today, and it will be just that, a conversation. And I'm joined by Andy Surridge from Pladis Global and Iain Somerfield from the Institute of Physics. Andy, would you like to give a quick overview of you and your role?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So Andy Surridge. So Pladis, you might not have heard of Pladis. Pladis was born about 7 years ago. It was formed from some of the world's most loved snacking brands. You might have heard some of them: Bitches, Godiva, Jacobs Cars, etc., etc. Today we make, bake, and sell about 75 brands to 150 countries through 16,000 colleagues. And so for those 16,000, I'm the global head of leadership and learning and development.
Brilliant. And I should have pre-warned people to come prepared with snacks after that introduction as well. Thanks for that, Andy. And Iain, over to you for an introduction, please.
Thanks, Helen. Iain Somerfield from the Institute of Physics, and I'm actually the first in our history, which is about 102 years old, learning and development manager. So we are the professional membership body for physicists in the United Kingdom and Ireland, but we also have members worldwide. We also have a sister company called IOP Publishing that is at the foremost in academic STEM publications worldwide, with colleagues based everywhere, from Beijing to little old Bristol, which is their headquarters.
Brilliant, thank you both. And it's going to be really interesting to hear about some of the problems and challenges and opportunities that are facing your teams and your businesses as well. But I think it's really interesting that you're both at slightly different stages of your journey with Thrive. So Andy, Pladis launched Thrive about 3 weeks ago now, is that right?
That's right.
Excellent. And Iain, you're just on that journey through implementation. How's that going?
It's going really well. We've got a date in the diary for our launch as well, so which is always good. Plus some really exciting activity that we're going to be doing with some of our colleagues, which includes you, obviously, Helen, along the way in the next few weeks.
Brilliant, good stuff. Well, to dig into the first question, really, I'd be really keen to hear about some of the challenges that you are facing, either within an L&D team, and I appreciate, Iain, you're a one-person band, so when I say team, it's with your colleagues outside of learning and development, but also in terms of what's facing the challenges that are facing your businesses at the moment as well. So Iain, I'll pass over to you first.
I think rather than looking at it as challenges, is opportunities, of the fact that prior to my appointment, the Institute of Physics really didn't have any learning and development resource for staff. There was a small pot of budget for anybody who wanted to have some sponsorship to help them do a course or qualification. So there wasn't any real overview or strategic planning with regards to how we develop our people, how we make them feel that they can upskill and look at the opportunities to develop themselves in the career if they wanted and enjoyed the current role they had. So that was actually really good, a bit scary because you had a blank piece of paper and you went, where do I start? So actually having to develop a strategic plan from scratch has been a little bit scary, but also really enjoyable, and from my own personal development, really satisfying. And then bringing along my colleagues in IOP Publishing along, because they're sort of where we were at 3 years ago, so they're going through that journey now, with my colleagues who are in place and have been for the last 6 months. So it's really exciting to have that as I said, an opportunity rather than a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Good rephrasing of the question there. Thanks, Iain. And Andy, were you in a similar position? Did you have that kind of approach as well at Pladis, or had you had a longer standing approach to learning and development?
Slightly longer standing approach, but myself, I was only, maybe I'm about 18 months into the organization, and I walked into an incredibly agile, innovative organization that has massive growth ambitions, and that's set to continue. But it's got a really interesting paradox between being such a young company, 7 years as I mentioned, but also the balance with hundreds and hundreds of years of heritage behind it. You'll all know, perhaps, from your cookie jars from your childhood, a McVitie's digestive or something similar. And that kind of that balance between that heritage, tradition, and dynamism was really fascinating from a learning perspective, and more broadly from an organizational development perspective. And that comes with real excitement, but it's demanding as well in this space. And so I was thinking about this before, and I think the main things for me for 2024, the themes that are front of my mind were that learning has a really significant role in building the culture here, one that's inclusive, collaborative, and high performing. That's common across this organization, which has been born out of these mergers and acquisitions so quickly. We've also got the normal challenges that keep me up at night, like the time-old balance between speed of learning, the quality and the cost of it. Here, right now, it's about speed. Speed is about everything. But for me, it's about how do we keep the quality high at the sensible price points. But also the other part, I think, is about scalability of appropriate solutions as well. So a lot of my role globally is about, well, how do we find the right opportunities that are not just appropriate for one part of our organization where we test, learn, adapt something, but where's it appropriate to scale that across our organizational boundaries? And I suppose for me, Thrive is part of the unlock for that. It's the manner in which I can connect our right people with the right solutions at the right time.
Brilliant. I think there's a lot of what you're saying there, Andy, resonates with, I know, a lot of the things that Iain is dealing with at the moment in terms of, and lots of L&D teams will be facing, is that shift in learning culture and how to unlock the right things for the right people at the right time. So I saw Iain nodding along with a lot of what you're saying there, and that kind of strategic planning, strategic thinking, and how you can continue that as your journey progresses. And really interesting to hear, Andy, that Pladis is a fairly young company at 7 years old, like you say, but then Iain, with a really rich heritage, to use Andy's word, of the Institute of Physics. And actually the expectations you'd have based on that is that there'd be a long-standing tradition of learning and development in something like the Institute of Physics, and less so in a younger company. It's interesting that those two things have been switched, and how you're approaching those at this point. So let's think a little bit before Thrive. I know we've just been dealing with a few of those challenges, or opportunities, sorry, Iain, to think about what was your landscape like before Thrive? So what technology did you have access to, or did you not have anything? Or can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like for you, Iain?
Yes. So when I first joined the Institute of Physics, right at the start of the COVID pandemic, actually, one of the things that I was mindful of is that I needed that help because I was only one person, and I needed some kind of resource that was going to bring things together, and looked at a couple of options. And we have had two providers in the time that I've been in place. The current one, as we transition to Thrive, just wasn't fit for purpose in terms of what we needed for our staff. It was a platform that was shared for our membership as well. So they had the opportunity to have access to a number of pieces of content that will help them with their career development and their upskilling. But what we needed it to do just didn't work for our staff. So that was the reason why we started the journey just over 12 months ago to start looking at a new provider. And it was during that sort of realization that the conversations came about that our colleagues in our sister company, IOP Publishing, because we operate quite separately as businesses, and they were saying, right, we need to get our act together in terms of how we support their staff with developing their skills. So it was just serendipitous at the time that we said, right, let's look together. Let's look at a group-wide platform that actually gives us the opportunity to think about how we can collaborate more closely and actually learn together. Would be a great way, a good starter for 10 to start building some relationships across the two organizations. So that's where we came about, and as I said, it wasn't a quick journey, shall we say. We started sort of looking at a long list, so to speak, of various providers just over 12 months ago, and sort of looking and feeling about, well, what is it that we need, and what are the capabilities of the various providers that we were looking at.
Awesome, and we'll dig into some of those things as well as we go through the conversation. But really interesting that it's not just how you're supporting your people and how you create that learning culture, again to reference the conversation at the beginning, but how you actually create that sense of collaboration between two quite separate organizations, which is quite a unique challenge in itself as well. Andy, what does that, or did that landscape look like for you at Pladis Global?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty fresh, right? So we said we launched about 3 weeks ago, so the memories are still fresh. We had an overly complex learning technology estate. As I've said before, it was driven from the rapid expansion of the business, and therefore legacy systems that came with. When we did a bit of a stock take, if you will, it comprised multiple traditional LMSs, primarily for compliance purposes. We had multiple, probably best called file repositories, for place to store stuff that people could access for their development. And also, interestingly, we had a number of training supplier portals in play where people had previously procured content and needed a place to access it. So short version, it really varied, really complex. And our colleagues were telling us it was just way too difficult to understand what was where do I go and find something, or where do I even have a look to see if it's there for me? So I had some real opportunities to reduce costs by consolidating the technology that we had, to simplify that experience for colleagues, and really be able to make then some smarter decisions on behalf of the company for some higher quality learning investments. And then off the back of that, I would have a single view. I'd be able to understand the relative effectiveness of those investments and the return we could get from them. So yeah, it was complex, but we've ended up in the right place. So it's not too dissimilar actually from Iain's situation, where it felt the right time for our multiple businesses to come together for a single solution.
And I think it's really interesting that we did start speaking a little bit about how some of those features on Thrive might start supporting some of those opportunities that you've both spoken about. But Andy, I know when we were preparing for this session, you spoke about, well, actually, I was more interested in compiling a list of what problems were facing us, and how I would then go about solving those problems. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So for me, honestly, especially in the initial stages of the search, it wasn't features for me. Features in my mind are the solutions to a need that we've got. And I had dozens and dozens of providers wanted to talk to me about some amazing, shiny, headline-grabbing features. And I do get it from that perspective. But for me, for us at Pladis, it was really important, more important in the early stages, to be super clear on what our colleagues needed to be able to achieve through some technology and how they would go about doing that. And that what they were our requirements that then could be solved by some features. And so we spent a fair bit of time actually getting really clear on what those requirements were. And in simple terms, we looked at it based upon the past, the present, and the future. We had a look in the past of where we'd been. What did we like about the solutions that we had before? What did we not like? What had we learned about it? The present was about really understanding the colleagues that we were solving for here. Who were they? Where were they? What were their needs? What were their wants? How do they use technology? And we created some personas around that to articulate some of that trends to make it manageable. And as I mentioned, then we looked at the future. So we looked at the organization's future and the strategy, people plans, our aspirations that we were going to need to align with. But also in that future part, we looked at the learning technology industry and what was out there, what's the art of the possible, because I didn't want to just be limited about what we knew. And so, look, we had hundreds and hundreds of requirements, and it felt a bit overwhelming, honestly, once we'd gone through that process. So we just kept it super practical, super simple. Document what we knew we needed. We categorized them and we prioritized them ruthlessly. And then simply, we might come on to talk a bit more about it, but pretty simply, we then went and asked some targeted providers to show us how their solutions, features, would be able to solve those requirements.
How did you get to that point, Andy, of knowing which suppliers to approach first? If you remember.
So we had, I thought, pretty robust selection funnel. It was a funnel. We started with over 100 potentials, and we ended up with Thrive. And so over what must have been maybe 3-4 months of this selection process, we started on the main with some desktop research. We looked at awards, we looked at websites, we went to our networks, we sweated the networks, we talked to lots and lots of people in initial stages, just about what's their technology, who do they work with, what could they do, to get a sense of what the market was like, before we entered into something a bit more structured, which started to narrow down and weed out those providers that simply couldn't match the needs that we had. And that was done through a few more formal procurement processes, presentations, demonstrations, where ultimately we got to a final 2 and we asked for formal quotations, and then took a step back and just said, hold up, let's have a look at all of the information we have in front of us, and make a truly unbiased decision, which was really ultimately easy to do, because we were super clear on what we absolutely needed and what were the cherries on top. But we were really clear on what we absolutely needed. And we were really clear with what the technology shortlist providers could do for us. And we went with it.
Great. I'm obviously very happy you chose Thrive as well. It's great to hear those steps as well, and some really practical advice for people who maybe are really early on in that journey in terms of how they narrow down, they can problem solve and then narrow down to the features or the vendors who might be able to solve those problems for them. Iain, did you follow a similar route? Because I know you're very committed to moving towards a 70-20-10 model within IOP, and that obviously plays into what features you would have been looking for from a vendor. Is it, again, a similar story to Andy there, or was your approach slightly different?
No, very, very similar to Andy, although I think because of our obligations as a not-for-profit, as a regulated charity, we did have to go through a formal tender process as part of our procurement processes. Very similar to Andy, we did a lot of desktop searches. What I will say is LinkedIn's algorithm is quite amazing to bring up various suggestions of platforms to go and have a dive in and investigate. So if you really don't know where to go and you're not sure about the Google search results you get back, I can highly recommend just click on following a couple, click on Thrive to follow, and then all of a sudden you'll get lots of other suggested providers if you wanted to have that. So what was really, really interesting is that we were quite clear, both myself and our colleagues in publishing, that it was about the end user experience. That was what we were trying to get at. Now, for publishing, it was quite a low bar because they had never had a learning platform before. So they were sort of going, whatever we go with has to be really accessible, has to be powerful for the end user, and for them to really easily use, to get to content quickly that was relevant to them and that was in line with the modern way of accessing anything digitally. So that was really, really important to me. And as you said, Helen, about our conscious move in 2024 to, in the IOP side, to a 70-20-10 learning model. Up until then, we'd done a lot of pushing of programs in order to get the which was aligned with our strategic goals, I will say that, but it was about trying to get our staff population to a point where we had some consistency in competency. So we got to that stage, and now it was about empowering our people to pull in content that was relevant for them and was relevant for colleagues who were on a similar journey to themselves, that they could share content, interact, and learn together, but learn about them and to themselves. So it was really crucial for us that we had a platform that had that social learning element in order for us to really make the 70-20-10 model come to life. And I think that was quite crucial for us, as well as having that impactful content that was bite-sized. It was all about micro learning that had that impact, that wasn't going to bore the pants off colleagues, and for engagement to fizzle out.
Brilliant. I think it's, I mean, fundamental to the way people learn is it's social at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's no surprise to me that that's one of the main reasons that you chose Thrive, because it's embedded in our product from the get-go. So really pleased to hear that. I suppose whilst you were going through that process and deciding who to shortlist and how to narrow it down, were there any standout moments that you can recall from that process, Andy, that stood out to you in terms of, well, this vendor has really made me think differently, or approach this differently through the questions they asked or the relationship that they built with you?
Yeah, Helen, for me, it was the key bit was the latter part you mentioned there. So it wasn't a moment. It was about the relationship. Throughout the process, I had some hard requirements, but I also was on the search for a partner, not just a provider or a supplier. And I still need that today. I'm going to need it forever in this regard. And so I really needed prospective partners to take the time to really understand our business, the culture that we had, the plans that we had, our needs. And then to really show me, don't just tell me, but show me how Thrive can bring it to life. I didn't want a cookie cutter. That's not what I needed at all. That's not what this business is like. And I'm sure everybody else would agree about their own organizations. But we wanted to get lots of hands and eyes on the system and really see it come to life, see how we would do those things. But also I really respected the team's honesty and openness throughout. Tell me when they don't think I've got something right, when we think we've missed something. I'm not the expert. I don't do this very often, and so I really rely and respect that kind of consultative relationship to help us along that journey throughout. It's not just the business case; it's through the entire selection process. I valued it from Thrive. And one other really important part for me was access to benchmarking insights to understand what else is happening around, especially FMCG from our perspective, so that we can learn from what's worked and what hasn't worked in other places as well. And so, yeah, like I said, I found Thrive not only from the hard requirements perspective to be our chosen partner, but also from the relationship that the team, literally from the first conversation to when it was handed over, end of contracting, gave me that confidence that I was in it with a partner.
And I can see, Iain, that you're nodding your head along to what Andy's saying there. And it's so reassuring, Andy, that those are the points that you pick up on, because partnership is so important to it, isn't Iain? I know you're going through implementation at the moment with Dom and Stacey and Yipping as well. And I know that's really important and has been throughout the process. Did you want to pick up on any points that Andy was saying there?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I mean, everything that Andy's just said chimes and resonates so much with me. And one of the things I really wanted to, you know, if any advice people wanted to hear was this, even before you make a decision about who you go with, it's about assuming that any people, including especially the shortlisted companies that you were approaching, were going to be your partner. And that means you have to approach it in a very open and transparent way, any kind of procurement process that you go through. If it is a formal tender process like we did, or if you're doing it in a more informal way, always be open and transparent. So I can give you some examples of how I approached this, because I was the lead person, and that was about telling everybody who the other providers who are on the shortlist and through the process is going to be. And I used to, as a everyday occurrence, if I was emailing one person, I would email them collectively, and they would all know who was involved. And it's also about getting a provider to be allowed that space of, right, we've received the documents, we've received your requirements, we don't quite understand what you're talking about, tell us more about those requirements in the context. So it's about setting up Q&A sessions. And one of the other things that we took on board, and this was really important, and we heard, and I would say that going to learning technologies and meeting people before you go to thing is a really good way of doing that as well, is taking on board the things that all those providers, not just Thrive, but whoever may come up with your selection criteria. And that happened with us, where as Andy said, we're not the experts. The providers are. Thrive are the experts in learning platform technology. So you listen to them, and one of the other providers said, well, have you thought about not only just getting stakeholders to try it out and on a demo site, but bringing them together in a room, and we'll run a workshop for them for a couple of hours face to face. And we did, and we actually incorporated that idea into the formal tender process. So each of the providers came in, sat with our wider stakeholders, our subject matter experts, anybody that might have an input into how the final provider would land with IIOP, to engage and get their hands on the technology. And that was really crucial, and links back to that initial criteria of how is it going to land with our colleagues? what is the end user experience going to be like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and again, it also builds on that sense of partnership, doesn't it? So how can you go that one step further to bring everyone along? I mean, stakeholder buy-in is so important when you're going through a process to get budget sign-off ultimately for any type of new technology. So that leads me on to another question around the support that vendors like Thrive support people with in terms of writing business cases for learning platform technology, because we often get asked to help with those sorts of things, but it's also often something that comes up in conversation with learning leaders across the industry in terms of how do I write an effective business case to make sure I secure what I need that's right for the business. So, and I know I appreciate both of you have been through this process this time, but also other times before. So do you have any top tips when it comes to writing business cases or how you might approach that? And Andy, I'll pass over to you to that one.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know whether these are top tips. Let's see how it's received. But and Iain might have done something similar. We ended up writing 2 business cases. The first one, that sounds awful and really painful, but actually it wasn't. The first one we called an order of magnitude. The point was, it was an outline case. It was after a collaborative definition phase of the piece of work. We talked about requirements. I wanted to prove to myself, my colleagues, my key stakeholders, that the transformation actually had some legs. It was really worth doing. So ultimately, there was a case for investment. I used this outline business case, which contained a clear view on the current situation, the vision for the future, what the opportunity to change would be, and the outcomes we might expect. As I used that as an engagement tool. I used it to walk around the key stakeholder groups to get buy-in. And I could really then sense whether there was the genuine support, the genuine appetite and availability of funding before I got too far down the process through that lightweight outline business case. So then when it came to the second, more full one, which was after the selection process, once we'd chosen the recommendation of Thrive, we refined it, made it a bit more accurate, of course, but ultimately nothing had changed drastically. And so it was a really smooth process to continue the more formal decision and release of funding, given the overwhelming support we had previously. So that could be an approach. It worked really well for me. Could work. There might be some other bits I learned along the way. Don't write it for yourself. Write it for your stakeholders. What's interesting to them? What do they want to know about? How is it going to help them achieve what they need to, rather than you? Absolute clarity on what you're recommending, why you're doing it, and how you think you'll get after it. Because then it's really easy for you to make the argument simple and clear. And then don't try and have all the answers yourself. I must have reached out to colleagues, my network, the Thrive team for advice in finalizing the business case throughout. You don't have to have all of the answers yourself. There's plenty of people that you can, excuse the phrase, but steal with pride from that have done this stuff before.
Some brilliant tips there, Andy. Thank you. And I know, Iain, your situation will be slightly different, as we've just said, because you have a board of trustees to kind of get through as well. So how do you approach it when you've almost got those 2 groups, to senior leadership and then trustees to approach?
Yeah, I was going to say throw in 2 senior leadership teams into that mix, and then you're sort of like, oh wow. The key to this is to get early communications up and running with your executive, the senior leadership team, who are the ultimate holders of the drawstring, so to speak, in terms of budget, and say, look, we're looking at this. This is the reason why. One of the other things is really to connect up the dots in terms of linking any organizational strategic objectives and strategy paper. That's really useful to do, because that's the language that the senior leadership team are talking to each other, and they're looking through the lens of the organization through that documentation. So if you can make that direct link for your business case to have a new learning platform, absolutely do it. So really ensure that you make those direct links with any strategy. But yes, just sort of keep them in the loop, have that contact continuously with, right, we're at this stage, are you happy for us to proceed? And then go ahead. And then when you get to that point of, right, we've gone through the tender process, we've got this recommendation, we want to go with Thrive, you've built the business case, so to speak, already, for then to go, right, can you give us the dosh, please? Can you write write your name on the contract when it comes around? And then it just goes through on the nod, and the whole process is so much easy when you do it that way, rather than sort of do all the work. And it is hard work. It will feel, I'm not going to shy away from it. It can dominate your work day once you get into the real nub of making a choice for it, if you're not careful. So if you do all that in the first and then approach your senior leadership teams, and then they turn around and go, we don't know why you're doing this, then you're really stuck, because you've kind of sort of said to the provider, right, yeah, we're going to go for it, we just got to get through the exec, no problems at all. And then there's a delay, and it's sort of like, well, what's happening? And that throws your timetable about what you want to do in terms of your learning strategy all out of place. So really engage with your exec teams at an early time.
Yeah, thank you, Iain, for that insight as well, because I think it's not only useful for learning teams to know how to approach those conversations internally, build those relationships, and make sure you're bringing people along on that journey. But as a supplier, if we're saying, have you spoken to your senior leadership team? How have you approached this internally as well? Then we can help you to start thinking about that if you've not quite got to that point yet. And obviously, everyone wins in that case. So if we jump ahead slightly, we've been through the process of narrowing down the vendor that we're going to go with. We've managed to secure budget from and budget sign off from our senior stakeholders, and you're now in that implementation phase, which I know you both know very well. Andy, you've been through it. You've launched, but Iain, you're going through that right now. One of the temptations we see from customers is to say, well, I know that Thrive can solve so many problems for us, so let's do everything. And actually, during those implementation sessions, our team work with you to figure out, well, what are your priorities for you, and really what you want to focus in on first. So how have you made that choice, Iain, to say, I know that these are the use cases we want to kind of go after first, in the long term we might go after something else?
Yeah, and I will say this, what was really striking was the team at Thrive didn't start with, okay, so what do you want to it to look like? What content do you want? They said, right, tell us what your strategy is. What's your organizational direction of travel? What are you then wanting to do in terms of your priorities for your L&D activity and everything? And that was a completely different experience to one that I've ever experienced from any other vendor. I found it really refreshing, and the fact that Thrive didn't pay lip service to that they actually read. So Yipping, who's part of our implementation team, what a character, what an amazing person to have for Thrive, because she absorbed all this information, and because we had to give her 2 different strategy papers for 2 effectively different organizations, and we were kind of lucky as well that we had just launched our new, from the institute side, our new 5-year strategy, which is a fantastic document that really helped me actually in my role for the next 5 years. But Yipping took all that on board, and it was also really helpful with my colleague from publishing, Catherine, to then decide, well, actually, whilst we have two organizational strategic goals, we can align our L&D priorities so that we actually do this in a collaborative way, and that our colleagues in publishing and IOP experience the same journey at the same time over the next 12 months. And we've got that clear vision going forward, which is really exciting, actually. And that in this job where, and I'm sure there's quite a few people in the listening to us who are one people L&D teams, that when you have that collaboration and partnership, not just with an internal colleague, but with the team at Thrive, that really makes you feel, oh yeah, I've got a team around me now. It's quite extraordinary. And that's actually I just sort of looping back a little bit to that process. That was the moment when we went, oh my God, we're choosing Thrive, was when the business development team put on, this is how we're going to do your implementation. This is all about partnership. We want to do that. And I will say this, I'm sorry to embarrass Tom Beale, who is our business development contact in Thrive. He got us emotionally. He got at the heartstrings, because he turned around and said, we don't want to be just a provider. We want to partner because we are excited about your L&D journey. We actually want to be part of that. We want to form part of how you really embed and engage a learning culture in both the IOP and IOP publishing. And that was that moment where we went, yeah, okay, let's go.
Amazing, Iain. You've said so many nice things about all of our team there, so thank you so much. They'll be really pleased to hear that. And I think like honing in on that strategy piece as well is so important and crucial to the success of any implementation. Andy, how was your experience with that during those initial stages of your implementation?
Yes, so very similar, right? So really important for us, and we started to get clear on this the further we got to the end of the selection process. The more educated we were, the more we really thought about, well, how are we actually going to do this thing? And so we had a decent idea when we came to the more formal sessions around scoping and planning implementation. And for me, it was really important that we thought about things in 3 different ways. So we thought about our ambitions and we put them into time brackets. So we thought about, for example, the launch month. What would good look like? What would we want our people to be able to do at the end of 1 month? What does it feel like here having Thrive in? Then we've done the same for quarters. We've taken 3 monthly time blocks and really tried to understand, so what is it that our people are doing differently? How are they feeling? And then how would we know that we're making progress along that? And so when we can start to talk about the measurement of success, or at least indicators that we're moving at least in the right direction. And so if you ask me what happens in 12 months, I don't really know yet. I've got some rough ideas, but I'm really clear on what the end of this month, so the end of next week, what that looks like, and then what the next quarter's development looks like. So ambition and time boxing, it was important to me. That helped educate the implementation. Timing for us at Pladis was really, really important as well. So when in the organizational calendar, were we going to do this? When does it feel most appropriate, most impactful, most valuable for our people? And we made the decision, we had this golden moment, which was at the end of March, when our colleagues would all have completed their more formal personal development planning sessions, career conversations with their managers. That's the moment. We knew it. That's the moment where we must have the software available and the huge range of learning opportunities available to give them some rocket fuel for their year's development. It's not the only answer, but it was just perfect timing for it. And the other part we just needed to square away was the resources. Oh, it sounds a bit dry, but it was, when was I going to actually get the money? When could I actually have some investment or capacity to be able to implement this thing? Centrally, we would need to put in some effort to do that. but also when we look, we're a regionally based business, but also regionally. So when's the capacity available, and how do we secure that for the longer term to be able to embed the foundations, but also then build upon it? So we just had to square those, our ambitions, with some timing and availability of capacity to know that it was the right moment to get implemented and how far we would go with certain phases.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it's some really useful tips again for people there, Andy. And I think to hone in on what you were saying there in terms of launching at the right time and enabling people to feel supported to continue that professional growth journey. What I presume that's still an area, maybe that skills development that you're focusing on now. But what other things have you got going on that are going to lead into your future as a business? What initiatives are you running at the moment?
Crikey, we have a huge number. So we're, as I said, we're a regionally based business primarily. So for me, it was really important. First part was those, I mentioned the word foundations, but I use it quite a lot at the minute because we're sort of starting again in some of this space. How do we set out really clearly, accurately, and in a simple manner, our compliance needs in all our different languages across all of our different territories, right? We had to get that absolutely perfect. And we've done it. It's in place. From that platform, we can start to build on some more sexy things, right? So we're building leadership development programs, blended programs through the platform. We have a large campaign I mentioned at the start of the call around inclusivity, and how do we help develop our organization, the culture that we've got here throughout the hierarchy, and what are some of the skills and capabilities that we can help develop in that space through the platform. And so there's this mix of compliance, mandatory stuff that just must be done. There's then some more structured, more organized, blended learning programs that we've built. And then there's some more free and open self-directed learning resources that are available for people to match those kind of PDP things that I mentioned before as well. So a real mix. And we are in the early stages. We're trying things out for the first time. We're doing some of these for the first, and we're already learning from it. But the beauty of Thrive is it allows me to experiment, to take some feedback from my colleagues and change things instantly, quickly, with really limited administration behind the scenes to make these kind of things happen. So the flexibility, the agility of the platform allows me to do these things for the first time with such little risk. It's great.
Some brilliant words there, flexibility and agility. We know that are so important to L&D at the moment. We keep hearing spoken about in all different aspects of the work that we deliver. Iain, how about you? What are you focused on, or what do you have coming up? And I suppose what are you launching with, if you can reveal that at the moment?
I'd rather not go into too much detail, just in case there's some colleagues. So I want to keep some excitement and anticipation there. But very similar to Andy, I mean, our primary focus was, well, what are the learning that is shared right across our two parts of the group, and it goes to those hearts, just as Andy said, about essential training, compliance, governance, things like that. So we can do that, but how do we make that, sorry to use the word, but sexy? How can we do the things that are different, that again goes to the heart of our desire to make the end user experience as really empowering and optimistic as possible? The other thing that I have really been investigating, partly due to your podcast, Helen, is that it's about how we learn to learn. How do we learn differently? How do we learn better? And we're looking at dropping some really good content that actually the content team in Thrive have come up with the goods on that, about a brilliant pathway about learning to learn, which I think for both parts of the organization who are quite nascent in their learning culture, I think that would be really useful, and that it's content that will help people to learn in the 21st century, that moves away from that I suppose that cliche about what e-learning looks like that came about from the late 90s and the start of the millennium. So that's the bit that I'm really excited about, and about getting people to think about how we learn differently in a better way in the workplace.
It's so important, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily something that you even really get taught, even at school. How do you learn effectively, and what effective learning looks like in an educational system is very different to actually how people learn in the workplace. So I think it's really interesting and exciting that you're launching with that, Iain, to hopefully help people along on that mindset shift that will be needed. So very exciting. If we think then, as we wrap up the conversation, which has been hugely insightful and I hope really useful for the people that are listening, one of the things that, again, we do differently at Thrive, that extended level of partnership and collaboration is obviously key to what we do. But we also like to take that a step further, and we created at the back end of last year something called the Innovation Panel, which brings together, we invited all of our customers to be part of it, and people obviously like yourselves stepped forward and said, I'd love to be part of this and to contribute to it. And the idea is that we can share things that are going on with our product. You can feed directly into that, but we can also blue sky think on some of those ideas. And I know, Iain, you amazingly managed to come to the first session that we held in London, which was a face-to-face session. Andy, you're just on the beginning journey of involvement in the innovation panel. So I suppose, Iain, what did you get out of that session, and what made you want to contribute to the innovation panel as well?
Well, firstly, you brought back, because it was based at the old BBC Television Centre, so it was a bit nostalgic for me. But putting that aside, I think it was about ensuring, whilst we're at the implementation stage and at the beginning of the partnership of Thrive, that we look to future proof. How do we go forward and help with all the fantastic technology that you've got on your roadmap, and how can that make learning more impactful for our colleagues? And that was key for me. And the fact that the excitement about the AI is just, I cannot wait for this to go live and what have you with the platform, especially when it comes to content building. I think that's going to be a real game changer for us.
Amazing. Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time to be both customer and a part of the business as well. There's lots to come, and can't wait to see what happens with it. Andy, as I said, you've kindly signed up to the innovation panel, but are yet to experience one of our face-to-face sessions or one of our virtual sessions. So what are you looking forward to? What made you sign up, I suppose?
Few really important bits for me. Extending my network in this space, specifically with other Thrive customers that have been through some of the lessons, learned some things, what's worked, what hasn't. Really important for me. Excuse me. But also from an industry perspective, staying ahead of where are we going with this? How can that benefit me, benefit the organization? Excuse me. And then there's some bits that you said, really important about being able to understand the roadmap, influence the roadmap, have some input early sights and input to that. But I think the thing that really clinched it, Helen, for me was probably the free hoodie as well.
The merch always gets you. The merch always gets you.
I haven't had mine yet.
Oh, Iain.
Oh, come on, Iain. Come on.
Bringing the tone down. Come on, right, we'll sort that out. Don't worry. Amazing. Well, both, thank you so much for sharing your insights, sharing your best practice, your top tips. As I said, there's so much for people to take away into the conversations that they're having with learning vendors like ourselves, but others as well. And I think it's especially important as we head into Learning Technologies, the biggest learning event of the year next week, that people have the opportunity to think about how they frame some of these questions, what problems they're trying to solve, and not just be attracted by big shiny features, Andy, as to your point earlier in the conversation. So thank you both so much. It's been so nice to be part of this conversation, and I hope it's been really beneficial for the people listening as well. So thank you both, and speak to you all soon.
Thanks so much.